When extreme weather hits, the poor usually suffer the greatest hardship. Disaster relief agencies follow the storms and earthquakes, but increasingly governments and aid agencies are going one step further and are striving to reduce the damage before a natural disaster strikes. In today's program, you'll see how poor farmers in Honduras and fishing communities in Vietnam are strengthening nature's defenses as the effects of climate change become increasingly felt.
Vietnam is one of the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world. Typhoons and violent storms are frequent, 8 in 2006, with often calamitous consequences. The country's entire 3,000-kilometre coastline is low-lying and vulnerable. In the northern provinces, an extensive sea dike system has been in place for centuries. The dikes give some protection, but not against storms classified level 8 or above. Waves over 3.5 meters are simply too powerful. Between 1995 and 2004, natural disasters claimed almost 6,000 lives in Vietnam. Over 320,000 houses were destroyed, costing the country's overstretched economy an estimated $2.5 billion. Relief agencies dealt with the aftermath. In 1994, Vietnam's Red Cross decided to try a new approach, preventing or at least reducing disaster before it happens. The Coastal Environmental Preservation Program involves local communities in planting mangrove forests along the shoreline. Dang Van Thao has been involved in the project from the very start.
The mangrove project done by Vietnam Red Cross bring to it is a green wood to protect the sea dike system, where the dike and the people are at risk, and it's active involvement of the local people, of the community, from the planning to the implementation and the monitoring and protection of the mangrove.
2/3 of Vietnam's population earn their living from agriculture. Villagers help plant the mangroves, supporting the project from the very outset. Mangrove trees are planted along the coast to protect vulnerable communities, as well as their dikes, shrimp farms and rice fields. Over 100 kilometres of coastline have been planted with the trees since 1994. Today the planting extends over a kilometre into the sea. The mangroves act like a giant breakwater. Storm waves are reduced to harmless ripples by the time they reach the coastal sea dikes. This is Tan Tan Commune, 100 kilometres from Hanoi City in the north of the country. It's home to around 4,000 people. Here the dike protects the industry that is the backbone of this community, shrimp farming. Hung, a shrimp farmer from Tan Tan, is a strong supporter of the mangrove project.
The mangroves play an important part in our lives. They stop heavy waves from causing damage and protect the dike. They also ensure the ecosystem is balanced. The shrimp and fish under the water bring many benefits to the people here.
The Tan Tan People's Committee acts as the commune's meeting point. Regular classes are held here for local farmers. Hung now sings at classes like these throughout the region, reminding farmers of the importance of preserving the mangroves. Among the roots of the mangroves, shrimp, crab and fish thrive, attracting the attentions of local fishermen. Although the pickings are easy in the mud at low tide, tree roots can be easily damaged. At high tide, these roots become invisible, but fishermen persist. Guards based out at sea monitor the activities of these fishermen. Bui Van Song is one of these.
We are
protecting the mangroves from the people who try and go into the forests to cut down the trees to make firewood. We are also protecting them from fishermen who come here to find shrimp or fish. They damage the roots of the trees when they are digging around for shrimp, and this kills the trees.
Now even fish stocks have increased, and fishermen, like Nguyen Van Tok, are reaping the benefits.
Because of the mangroves, the number of fish and other species here has gone up a lot. In the past, without mangroves, there were smaller numbers of fish and other species. Mangroves are very helpful to our lives, and to nature and the environment.
Although Tan Tan is now protected by 3 kilometres of mangroves, 2 kilometres of nearby coastline remain unprotected. Here, diggers are busy rebuilding the dike after damage caused by a recent storm. Adverse conditions in this section of coastline have meant repeated attempts to plant mangroves have failed. Farms here are at risk.
The land here is very sandy. When we try and plant the mangroves here using the tried and tested methods, the trees simply do not survive. They are dragged away by the waves. It is very hard to plant here. So we need to find and develop new ways of planting the trees so that they can survive on coastlines like this, where the waves can be very strong. Maybe by growing the trees elsewhere first.
A further 2,900 kilometres of coastline in Vietnam remain unprotected. With funding for the project ending in 2010, financing for the continuation and expansion of the mangroves will need to be found elsewhere. Pham Duc Thuan is the Deputy Director of the Forestry Department.
We would welcome the Red Cross to continue this project, but if the Red Cross does not continue after 2010, then we will do all we can to find a way of ensuring it is continued. As well as government budgets, we will search for investment and funding elsewhere, including our business and private sector enterprises.
It's estimated the project has cut the cost of dike maintenance by $7.3 million a year. To date, around 20,000 hectares of forest have been planted. This represents up to 8% of the total national target of 250,000 hectares in the entire country. There's much more to be done. So what of the future? With climate change now recognized as a problem, it's widely accepted that extreme weather will become more frequent and more severe in years to come.
With increased awareness of the fact that climate change will just simply increase the risk of a typhoon or a storm surge or another risk to increase, the conclusion is very obvious. Then that is that more investment is needed in more mangrove planting, but also stronger dikes.
From sea to land. In a moment, we'll see how farmers in Honduras are protecting against disasters.
When extreme weather hits, the poor usually suffer the greatest hardship. Disaster relief agencies follow the storms and earthquakes, but increasingly governments and aid agencies are going one step further and are striving to reduce the damage before a natural disaster strikes. In today's program, you'll see how poor farmers in Honduras and fishing communities in Vietnam are strengthening nature's defenses as the effects of climate change become increasingly felt.
For today's young inhabitants in the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa, there are no memories of the devastation left by Hurricane Mitch nearly a decade ago. As people continue with daily life, subtle remnants of the city's painful past remain, etched on riverside homes. When Hurricane Mitch ripped its way through Central America in 1998, Honduras was hit hardest. 18,000 people died, more than 3 million were left homeless, and devastating structural and agricultural damage totaled over $6 million. 80% of the country is mountainous. Honduras's vulnerability lay in the degraded condition of its hillsides. Too many trees had been felled for firewood. The rain that Mitch brought with it turned the treeless and eroded slopes into lethal mudslides. But there was one part of Honduras, the region of Lempira, that managed to feed not only itself, but the rest of the country during the worst of the storm. Situated in the remote western hills of Honduras, bordering with El Salvador, this impoverished area also suffered extensive damage at the hands of Mitch.
How could this poor, backward area that was known in the national consciousness as receiving food aid provide food aid to those parts of the country which were supposedly the most developed, yet were the ones that suffered most in Mitch?
6 years before Hurricane Mitch, Ian Cherritt and Luis Alvarez, with support from the Dutch and Honduran governments, led the UN's technical team credited with changing Lempira's fortunes. Luis Alvarez couldn't know at that point that his efforts would pay off so handsomely 6 years later.
When we arrived in Lempira in 1992, there was only 16,000 hectares of forest, but 1,000 were being destroyed every year. At that rate, we wouldn't have a forest left. If you hadn't been here before, you wouldn't know the difference.
Farmers used to burning the land were ruining Lempira's natural ability to withstand heavy rains and erosion.
Slash and burn agriculture is the agricultural equivalent of a fast food economy, because it's a very easy, simple process. You cut down the bush, the trees, and you set fire and you plant. Once you've had one harvest, two harvests, it's no use. You have to move on because the soil is no longer fertile. The problem is, once the number of people grew and the density of the population grew, there was nowhere to move on to.
It left large tracts of hillside bare and very vulnerable to erosion and landslides. In their quest to stop farmers burning the land, the team made a key discovery. Some farmers still use the slash and burn technique, but retained an indigenous Lenca Indian tradition of growing their crops interspersed between trees. The shade provided numerous benefits. It pointed the team toward the solution, keeping the soil covered. The technical team collaborated with local farmers to develop an alternative to burning called zero tillage. This means leaving the trees covered with the remains of the old harvest. Planting between surviving trees and shrubs curbs soil erosion and landslides and greatly reduces evaporation, keeping the soil moist.
Cuando esto se mantiene cubierto, los rayos solares,
when the soil is covered, the heat of the sun's rays is reflected.
Entonces, el suelo
at a lower temperature means there's less evaporation, and the soil is kept cooler.
Evaporación y evita el calentamiento global de la tierra.
The soil here is much more porous, given that there are more roots, hence better water infiltration.
Filtración del agua, más espacio poroso. En cambio,
here, however, where the earth floor is not protected, it's hard, it's like stone. You can easily see the difference between the effects of a drop of water falling on here and on here.
Gota que caiga aquí.
Don Nemesio Mejia is one of the farmers who provided indigenous farming knowledge. The resulting Quesengual farming technique was named after his local area.
Before, we used to cut up the vegetation and burn it completely. Here in the winter, when the rains would come, they'd hit all the ash, which is what remained. Any of the fertiliser in the ash would be washed down the mountain.
That's what happened to most of the country when Hurricane Mitch hit. The Quesengual farming technique, however, meant that Lempira not only survived the storm, but was able to feed the rest of the country.
This soil protection is good and it's very important. We put our hearts into work in this way.
I
haven't been supported financially by anyone else. No. Nothing but the sweat from my brow has fed my family and given them an education. There's an improvement. We can see the great change in the way we work. The results are 2,000 times better.
Sí, 2000 veces. Sí.
Throughout Lempira, the improved techniques developed with the UN team led to increased yields and allowed farmers like Don Juan to store maize in silos. Silos had not been used before as there simply wasn't enough maize being produced. Now they'd be able to feed others in their hour of need.
For human beings, for families like ours, maize is key. It's a vital part of the food chain. The value of maize is that it sustains so many living things. I may not sell it, but its worth may come from elsewhere. I can give maize to a cow and I know she'll give me more milk.
Helping the rest of the country, and essentially saving themselves, has transformed the way farmers now work to preserve their environment.
One of the
things that Lempira taught us is that everything we start has to be sustainable. We drew the conclusion that the sustainability we've discussed lays with the youth, with children. We have to transmit this to our youth, so that from generation to generation, the culture of water management and informed attitudes towards no burn prevails.
La cultura del manejo de los recursos naturales.
That the natural habitat can contribute to minimize and to the impact of natural disasters that will be created by climate change and extreme weather events. So yes, biodiversity can assist and biodiversity should contribute because healthy ecosystems are important for the health of human beings, but it's also important for the health of the atmosphere.
Whilst Lempira's farming culture appears secure, farmers in similar arid regions of Honduras are beginning to adopt the same attitude towards improved and sustainable farming methods. Don Julian now plants maize using the same soil protection techniques on his farm, 140 kilometers from Lempira.
I want to change my life because I have family Changing people's mentality is vital, and I believe and trust that this is possible. Firstly, I would invite any farmer to come and visit me and see my land. Because from there, I'll be inviting him to think. And I'll know that once he's seen my plot, he'll understand the process and he'll go back to his farm. I know that there's a difference between his land and mine.
For scientists and farmers alike, Hurricane Mitch confirmed that man must work with nature to strengthen its immune system against the effects of climate change and extreme events.
Nuestro trabajo aquí
we believe that our work here has not only improved lifestyles, but it has saved lives.
Sino que a salvar vidas. Nos cuesta aprender de los demás, pero cuando
it's hard to learn from others, but when we do learn from others, problems are easily solved because we're not committing the same mistakes. If we do make mistakes, there'll be new ones.
Errores son errores nuevos.
Much of the clothing we wear is made of cotton. Most cotton farmers use polluting chemicals. Cotton farms take up just 2.5% of the world's farmland, but use 10% of all pesticides and 22% of all insecticides produced annually, according to the British government. This can have an impact on people's health. According to the World Health Organization, 20,000 people die every year from pesticide poisoning. But here in Gujarat in northwest India, some farmers are turning away from chemicals and switching to organic cotton production. According to the Gujarati government, 5,000 of the more than 100,000 cotton farmers here are now growing organic cotton. In part, they switch because of health concerns, but they also get a guaranteed minimum price for their cotton when prices are down. Keema Sauda and his family of 6 run a small 5-hectare farm near the town of Rapar in the district of Kutch. 5 years ago, he stopped using chemicals on his land. Modern organic farming is a combination of traditional and new methods. Instead of synthetic chemicals, Keema uses his own natural insecticide, with pods from the Akdu cactus, which are beaten into a milky pulp, then combined with leaves from the Neema tree, cow's urine and buttermilk. All is left to ferment for a couple of weeks and then spread over the crops. In tandem with this, Keema uses modern pheromone traps to catch bugs. The absence of chemicals attracts natural predators like birds. Instead of fertilizers, farmers use plenty of manure. In this area of Kutch, there are more livestock than people. Trained in modern composting techniques, the muck spreading is more efficient and effective. It takes 3 years of farming without chemicals before a farm is declared organic. The question is, what are the advantages to the farmer of moving to organic production? The yields from organic cotton farming match those of conventional cotton production when harvests are good, according to a recent study. In leaner times, organic farmers tend to produce more. At first, the input costs to organic farmers are comparable to non-organic cotton, though they drop over time. Prices too are similar, although organic farmers are guaranteed a minimum of 21 rupees per hectare, even if cotton market prices drop to as little as 18 rupees per hectare. Marks & Spencer, the British retailer with 450 stores in 30 countries, claims 10% of all its cotton products are now ethically sourced. It says it uses 1/3 of all organic cotton worldwide. The farmers in India say other big retailers such as Next and C&A are approaching them for organic cotton. while some of the major fashion retailers such as Monsoon are expanding their organic range and sponsoring ethical fashion shows in London. In the UK alone, 2 million tonnes of new shoes and clothing is bought every year, and according to the British government, about the same amount is thrown away. It's the fastest growing source of waste in British households. It's either destroyed in huge incinerators causing pollution or buried in landfill sites. Textiles present a particular problem for landfill because the synthetic man-made fibres don't decompose. One company pioneering industrial-scale recycling is Patagonia. In the early 90s, the California-based company took discarded plastic soda bottles, melted them down, and turned them into new, high-quality fleeces for snow skiing. A fleece made from old bottles can be recycled indefinitely, and any brand of fleece will do. Patagonia is now expanding its scheme with a new program called Common Threads. Here, shops not only sell new clothes, they receive old clothes as well in their recycling bins.
Yes, that's 100%.
The clothes from Patagonia's recycling bins are shipped here to a reprocessing plant in Japan. The old fleeces are melted down into pellets, from which the new polyester yarn is woven into new clothes and other products. Polyester is derived from oil and makes up nearly half of all textiles in the world. So recycling polyester means there is less demand on petroleum, thereby reducing carbon dioxide emissions and energy consumption. Marks & Spencer's autumn range of fleeces, trousers and other products prominently display their recycled credentials. All part, say the company, of its commitment to ensure that key raw materials come from the most sustainable sources available. For the whole world's clothing industry to be sustainable, rather than a small part being eco-chic, there is still a long way to go. To satisfy the soaring demand for organic cotton, there would need to be a seismic shift of thousands of farmers towards more environmentally friendly methods. For the Gujarat region of India, the prospect of prosperity through a booming organic cotton trade is a major boost to the rural communities. And for Kima and his family, green fashion could ensure a brighter future.
Done by Vietnam Red Cross bring to it is green wool to protect the sea dye system, where the dike and the people are at risk, and it's active involvement of the local people, of the community, from the planning to the implementation and the monitoring and protection of the mangrove.
2/3 of Vietnam's population earn their living from agriculture. Villagers help plant the mangroves, supporting the project from the very outset. Mangrove trees are planted along the coast to protect vulnerable communities, as well as their dikes, shrimp farms and rice fields. Over 100 kilometres of coastline have been planted with the trees since 1994. Today the planting extends over a kilometre into the sea. The mangroves act like a giant breakwater. Storm waves are reduced to harmless ripples by the time they reach the coastal sea dikes. This is Tan Tan Commune.
When extreme weather hits, the poor usually suffer the greatest hardship. Disaster relief agencies follow the storms and earthquakes, but increasingly governments and aid agencies are going one step further and are striving to reduce the damage before a natural disaster strikes. In today's program, you'll see how poor farmers in Honduras and fishing communities in Vietnam are strengthening nature's defenses as the effects of climate change become increasingly felt.
Vietnam is one of the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world. Typhoons and violent storms are frequent. 8 in 2006, with often calamitous consequences. The country's entire 3,000-kilometre coastline is low-lying and vulnerable. In the northern provinces, an extensive sea dike system has been in place for centuries. The dikes give some protection, but not against storms classified level 8 or above. Waves over 3.5 metres are simply too powerful. Between 1995 and 2004, natural disasters claimed almost 6,000 lives in Vietnam. Over 320,000 houses were destroyed, costing the country's overstretched economy an estimated $2.5 billion. Relief agencies dealt with the aftermath. In 1994, Vietnam's Red Cross decided to try a new approach, preventing or at least reducing disaster before it happens. The Coastal Environmental Preservation Program involves local communities in planting mangrove forests along the shoreline. Dang Van Tao has been involved in the project from the very start.
The mangrove project